So happy New Year, everyone. I'm sure that, like me, all of you stayed up until 11:59 last night and then counted the seconds until midnight because the first Sunday of Advent is the first day of the new year, at least as far as the church calendar is concerned. And I feel like I make this joke every year, and every year y'all look at me like I'm saying something weird. So, Happy New Year. Thank you. I love it when you humor me. Advent is a season when we reset and start over. Last week, we looked forward to the triumphant return and reign of Christ the King, the adult Jesus. But as far as the season of Advent is concerned, Jesus hasn't even been born yet. In the 4 weeks leading up to Christmas, we prepare ourselves for that miracle. We look at the world around us and reflect on why it is that we need a Savior to come to us. We ask ourselves what we can change in our world, in our communities, in our own selves, to make this world a better and safer place for a child to grow up in. Obviously, I'm talking about Jesus here, but I do think that Advent is a really great time to think about other children who, like Jesus, might be born into poverty or less than ideal circumstances, and who could really benefit from wise people offering them gifts and guiding them along the way. What's that? An elegant transition to our adopted family project? And there's a Christmas tree right now in Fellowship Hall, and you can take an ornament and then bring in the gift that's written on it? Wow, what a lovely and subtle transition. How cool it is that Advent is about preparing for Christmas by looking for the needs that we can fill in our own communities. And no, I do not have any shame. During our Advent season this year, we will be continuing to gather on Thursday mornings at 9 a.m. in the lounge for a Bible study series on Mary, the mother of Jesus. You don't need to read or prepare anything to join us, and you are more than welcome to come for the full series or just a session or two. I will also be bringing back our Wednesday evening prayer service on Facebook on Wednesdays, obviously, at 8 p.m., so that we can really take advantage of some of the beautiful colors of the art that goes with our worship series for this season, From Generation to Generation. That was created by a group called Sanctified Art, who we have turned to for the past several Lenten and Advent and summer seasons. If we look at the story of Jesus from generation to generation, that includes us, and the generations that any of us have been able to know personally, and generations as far back as we could remember or trace. But it also goes back a whole lot farther than that, which brings us to today's gospel reading, which is really the only logical place to begin a series entitled From Generation to Generation. Anyway, you know those long lists of begats? And so was the father of some other dude who was the father of, I think you get the picture? And you know how we all collectively skim over them when we're reading the Bible because they're long and full of the hard-to-pronounce names of characters we've already lost track of? Guess what our gospel reading is today? And yes, this is a text that I didn't necessarily have to choose, but did choose, even though no one is making me do it. And I spent a good chunk of time last night practicing these names. I am just saying, so you should be impressed. Our gospel reading this morning comes to us from the book of Matthew, chapter 1, verses 1 through 17. Hear now the word of the Lord. An account of the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, and Judah the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar, and Perez the father of Hezron, and Hezron the father of Aram, and Aram the father of Amminadab, and Amminadab the father of Nahshon, and Nahshon the father of Salmon, and Salmon the father of Boaz by Rahab, and Boaz the father of Obed by Ruth, and Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of King David. And David was the father of Solomon by the wife of Uriah, and Solomon the father of Rehoboam, and Rehoboam the father of Abijah, and Abijah the father of Asaph, and Asaph the father of Jehoshaphat, and Jehoshaphat the father of Joram, and Joram the father of Uzziah, and Uzziah the father of Jotham, and Jotham the father of Ahaz, and Ahaz the father of Hezekiah, and Hezekiah the father of Manasseh, and Manasseh the father of Amos, and Amos the father of Josiah, and Josiah the father of Jeconiah and his brothers, at the time of the deportation to Babylon. And after the deportation to Babylon, Jeconiah was the father of Salathiel, and Salathiel the father of Zerubbabel, and Zerubbabel the father of Abiud, and Abiud the father of Eliakim, and Eliakim the father of Azor, and Azor the father of Zadok, and Zadok the father of Achim, and Achim the father of Eliud, and Eliud the father of Eleazar, and Eleazar the father of Mathan, and Mathan the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born, who is called the Messiah. So all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations, and from David to the deportation to Babylon, 14 generations, and from the deportation to Babylon to the Messiah, 14 generations. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You're impressed, right? Again, no one made me pick that reading. I selected it on purpose because, believe it or not, I actually think it's a pretty great and meaningful place to begin the story of Jesus. Matthew name drops a few dozen people here, many of whom have really interesting stories, some of which I've shared before. We're probably most familiar with Abraham, David, and Solomon, although I've definitely preached about Isaac and that time he was almost killed by his father as a blood sacrifice. I've preached about Jacob, who was not a particularly great dad to like 10 of his 12 sons, and who was an even worse husband to 3 of his 4 wives and concubines, including my girl Leia, and whose name means sorrow. Fun fact. Just last month, I preached about Ruth and Boaz, and how they were able to come together to challenge and support each other, finding partnership in the midst of tragedy. I've preached about David, who was a good military strategist, but also a remorseless murderer, a power-hungry egotist, a shameless philanderer, an awful parent, and also a rapist. I'm not a fan, can you tell? You can tell. I've preached about how David had Bathsheba brought to him by force, and then arranged for her husband Uriah to be killed when David found out that Bathsheba was pregnant, because David didn't want people to know that Uriah wasn't the father. I haven't exactly preached about Uzziah, I don't think, but he's definitely come up in the origin story of the prophet Isaiah. Anyway, there are a lot of really good stories behind most of these names, and part of me wanted to highlight at least a few of them, but part of me was also aware that I may have already lost some of you by dropping 42 Hebrew names in a row. And also, I think there's still a lot we can get from this list, even without going into those specifics. There are a few names listed in this genealogy that do not appear anywhere else in the Bible, such as, for example, Mathan, the grandfather of Joseph, the stepfather of Jesus. Still, each life was meaningful to God, even if we don't personally know their story. But Jesus still chose to come into our world, even though we can't remember everything. There are people whose stories we would kind of rather not have in the record. I would rather not have a connection to King David, personally, but let's not forget that Abraham came like this close to murdering his own son, his only son, the son whom he loved, Isaac. Judah wasn't great either and did not do right by his daughter-in-law. Solomon left behind such a mess that his sons, including Rehoboam on this list, literally tore the nation of Israel into 2. But Jesus still chose to come into our world, even though we are sometimes ashamed of where we have come from. There are characters in this family tree across a broad spectrum of ethics, backgrounds, achievements, personalities, ambitions, etc. There are farmers and politicians, rich people, poor people, Israelites and foreigners, priests and sex workers, people who lived long lives, people who died young, people who were famous in their time, people who were outcasts, kings who ruled for 50 years or more and were beloved, kings who only lasted a couple years until they were overthrown and assassinated. It's a pretty colorful and diverse family tree, to put it mildly. But Jesus still chose to come into our world, knowing the kinds of people that we are, and wanting to live among us anyway. There are people in this family tree who had very difficult lives. There's rape and murder, starvation, deportation, exile, sickness, poverty, war, and every kind of human pain. But Jesus still chose to come into our world, to walk alongside us even in those times, because that is what it is to be human. This family tree skips over generations and puts some figures in the wrong century, but Jesus still chose to come into our world, even though we get some facts wrong. There are many stories in this family tree, generations and generations of stories. But Jesus listens to every story, understands every story, and makes room for every story, no matter how fun or hard or complicated that story is to tell. From generation to generation, there is room for every story.